Alexandra was jolted awake by the ringing of the phone. She was still half asleep, and it took her a few seconds to even realize where she was. She reached for the phone on the nightstand, her movements slow and sluggish. It was dark in the room, with only a sliver of moonlight peeking through the curtains. She squinted at the clock. 4 a.m. Who would be calling at this hour? She thought, answering the call. The voice on the other end of the line was muffled and slightly hoarse, and it sounded familiar. "Hi, Sandy." It was John, her husband. Alexandra sighed, trying to keep the irritation out of her tone. "John, do you know what time it is?" Yeah. John paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I just wanted to hear your voice." She narrowed her eyes, still trying to wake up fully. "Are you drunk?" she asked, unable to hide her annoyance. John chuckled a bit. "Maybe a little." "Just a little bit," John hesitated, with laughter in the background. "But it doesn't matter. I'm just chilling after the gig, nothing special." Alexandra was quiet, staring into the dark. Her fists were clenched, her heart racing. She knew John was on the road with his band, but hearing this was unexpected. "Who's laughing there?" she asked, her voice getting colder. "What's going on?" "Just Steve and Jerry." John tried to act like nothing was wrong, like it was normal. His casual tone only made her more anxious. "In your hotel room?" Alexandra was barely holding back her anger. "Yeah, we're just chilling, Sandy. Don't be mad, okay?" John's voice pleaded, but she was not in the mood for sympathy. "For in the morning and you're waking me up, John? And you have 2 guys in your room?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, but she sounded tense, like she was about to blow up. In the background, there was more laughter and one of the guys shouted, "Hi, Sandy." It sounded like Steve. "Get your friends out of my house," she said calmly, but there was a hint of anger in her tone. Steve's voice chimed in again. "Relax, Sandy. We're not up to any mischief here. We just wanted to hang out and have a drink." John's still fully dressed. He laughed again, enjoying the situation. Alexandra lost her cool. "John, kick them out right now." She spoke slowly and clearly. John started to respond, but Steve interrupted him. "Hey, John, don't get your wife all worked up. We're just chilling. All this jealousy is unnecessary. I'm hanging up now if you don't stop," Alexandra almost shouted. "And after that, don't bother me again." There was silence for a moment. Then there was some shuffling. Maybe John was talking to his friends, but Alex wasn't paying attention. She knew this call was the start of something bigger. Those late-night calls, those friends, she'd never met and only heard about. It couldn't continue. "Okay, we're going," John finally said, more calmly. "Sorry, Sandy. I didn't realize it would make you so mad." "I'm not angry, John," she said softly, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'm just sad. I'm sad that you don't get it. You don't see how it hurts me." John was quiet, and she heard his bedroom door close. Alexandra closed her eyes, trying to deal with the growing anger in her chest. "Sandy, John started to say, but his voice was tired and weak. "Call me tomorrow. Actually, today, during the day," she said. She couldn't keep talking anymore. "Okay. I love you." "I'm sorry," he said, sounding sincere. But Alexandra knew it wouldn't fix everything. She needed time to think about what would happen next. She ended the call and put her phone down. Lying in the dark, she stared at the ceiling and couldn't sleep. Thoughts raced through her mind, creating scenarios for the future where things weren't going how she wanted. The dark room felt strange and empty, just like her heart. Sighing, Alexandra rolled over on her side, closed her eyes and tried to calm herself amidst the chaos of her thoughts. But sleep wouldn't come, and as the sun rose, her anxiety grew. She knew her relationship with John was at an impasse, and the next day would be the start of a long journey to fix things. A week had passed since that fateful night. Alexandra tried to keep busy, work, kids, home, but thoughts of John kept haunting her. She couldn't remember when she last heard his voice. Messages from him were less frequent, and their conversations shorter and more empty. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold, untouched coffee, her head buzzing with emptiness. The kids were making a ruckus in the next room, their giggles filling the house, but Alex couldn't help but feel down. Her world, which had seemed so stable and secure, was starting to crumble around her. She knew she'd eventually have to make some tough decisions, but for now, all she could do was wait for something, or someone, maybe John, to come back and make things right again. One day, during lunch break, Alex's phone buzzed. It was a message from John. "Sorry for everything. Love you. Everything will change, I promise." She read the words on the screen, but she didn't feel any better. How many times had he said those words before? She dialed his number, finally ready to talk. "Hey, Sandy," his tired voice answered. "When are you coming back?" Alex tried to keep her voice steady, but it was trembling. "Soon. We're nearly done with the tour. Just a couple more gigs and I'll be home." "You always say soon, but it's never coming soon," she sighed, closing her eyes and trying to gather her thoughts. "John, I'm sick of waiting." There was a long silence on the other end, and it was so heavy she felt her heart skip a beat. "I know," he finally said. "I understand. But you have to trust me. This is our shot. You know how long I've been working towards this. We're so close, Sandy. Just a little more and it'll all be worth it." "And if it doesn't work?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. "If this is just the start of something worse?" John's voice took on a note of panic. "Sandy, don't talk like that. We'll figure it out. I promise. When I get back, we can talk about it. It won't take so long next time." "You know what, John? I've heard that before," Alexandra snapped, "and I believed you then. But something's changed. I can feel it in every word we say. You're like a stranger to me now, and I don't think that feeling can be fixed." John pleaded. "Just give me one more chance, Sandy. Please. I love you. I love our kids. Everything will work out." Alexandra let out a heavy sigh. She wanted so badly to believe him, but she knew in her heart that it might not be enough. "I'll talk to you later," she said flatly, and hung up before he could say anything. She stared at her phone screen, feeling a sense of emptiness wash over her. All the things they'd built together seemed so fragile, like a house of cards on the verge of collapse. Just then, the kids came into the room. Little Lisa was dragging her toy train, and Big Tommy was jumping around, roaring like a dinosaur. They were her rock in the storm of emotions. "Mom, look, I'm a dino," Tommy shouted, holding up his arms and making a scary face. Alex tried to smile, even though her heart hurt. She had to be strong for her kids. "Wow, that's a scary dino you've got there, Tommy." She tried to sound cheerful, but inside, she was lost. A few more days went by, and there was still no word from John. Alex knew that this tour had become more than just a job to him. He was totally into it, taking all the attention, energy, and time. She couldn't sit around waiting anymore. Her life was slowly fading into the background. One evening, after the kids went to bed, Alex decided to give John another call. His phone wasn't answering. She tried calling several times, but no luck. Inside, she was boiling with worry and anger. So she dialed his friend who was with him on tour. "Hey, Sandy," one of the guys from the band, Tom, answered. "Alex, Tom, where's John? Can't reach him." Tom, "Oh, probably forgot to charge his phone again. He was with us, but, you know, this tour isn't as easy as it looks." "Alex, what does that mean?" Her voice was shaking as she spoke. "Well, a lot of work and not much rest, you know?" Tom hesitated. "Don't worry, Sandy. He'll be back soon. Everything's going to be fine." But Sandy couldn't help feeling worried. Somehow, she just knew that everything's fine wasn't really true for their lives. Something in Tom's voice sounded off, like he was hiding something big. Later that night, as the house fell silent, Alexandra sat on the bed with her phone in hand. She couldn't sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of John, his friends, and their lives, all slipping away from her grasp. Her husband, who once seemed so close and dear, seemed more distant now, like they lived in separate worlds. She tried to figure out when everything had gone wrong, when they'd stopped being a united front and become two separate people leading parallel lives. She didn't know what to do anymore. She felt like she was losing control of her life and didn't know which way to turn. She needed a change, but she wasn't sure what that change should be. Once upon a time, Alexandra and John were a thing. They were young and full of dreams. They met at a concert, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. She was in a band, and he played guitar. They had big plans for the future, and life seemed so bright. But then things started to fall apart. Their paths started to diverge, and they started to drift apart. Alexandra remembered the night they first met. She was performing on stage, and there he was in the audience. He had this look in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. After the show, he came up to her and asked for a drink. "You were so amazing up there," he said. "I couldn't take my eyes off you." They talked for hours that night, and it felt like they had known each other forever. But then, something changed. They started fighting more and more, and before long, they were just friends. "Thanks, man," she replied shyly, feeling his eyes on her. "Are you a musician too?" "Yeah, I play guitar in a little band, but it's more of a hobby." "You got real talent, though." John smiled, and she realized he wasn't just a fan. He understood her love for music. So they started their journey together. They were inseparable, and their relationship grew into more than friendship. Music brought them closer, made their hearts race. They wrote songs, rehearsed, and dreamed of big stages and fame. But reality was tougher than they thought. When Alex got pregnant with their first kid, she knew their musical dreams had to wait. It was hard for her to let go of her ambitions at first, but with Lisa's arrival, everything changed. Mama Mode took over and music took a back seat. John, on the other hand, just couldn't give up on his dream. He kept performing, recording, and looking for opportunities to grow his band. They started to go in different directions. Every time John left for another tour, Alex stayed at home, busy with everyday life and the kids. She tried to hide her sadness, but she felt more and more empty inside. Years later, Alex was sitting on their couch, flipping through old photos. In one, she saw a young Alex and John, grinning, guitars in hand, surrounded by their friends. Back then, it seemed like they could conquer the world. Now, looking at that photo, Alex saw only the remnants of their dreams. She closed the album and set it aside, her eyes falling on the guitar in the corner, the one she played in her younger days. Her fingers twitched towards the strings, but she held back. It had been a while, and it didn't seem worth trying to get back into music now. She'd chosen a different path, that of a mom and a wife. But there was still something inside her that yearned for those days, when she felt alive and free. The dust on the guitar was like a symbol of lost dreams. She wondered what would have happened if things had gone differently, if she and John hadn't given up their careers for family, or if he'd left his band for her. Deep down, Alexandra knew it was all just a dream. John was passionate about his music. She was passionate about her family. They'd made choices, and now they had to live with them. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door. John had returned home. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were bright. Apparently, the concert had gone well. "Hi, Sandy," he said, walking up to her. "Hey," she replied, setting the album down. He sat next to her and gave her a hug, but Alexandra could feel a wall between them. A wall of unsaid words, unkept promises, and disappointments they'd built up over the years. "How are you?" he asked, but his tone didn't have the sincerity she was hoping for. "I'm okay," she replied curtly, feeling her anxiety rise again. John sighed and leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. Alexandra watched him and realized he'd once been her muse, her rock. Now he was becoming more and more like a stranger to her. The room was silent and heavy. Alex felt like something big was about to happen, something that would change their lives. Night had fallen over the city, and only a few lights were shining through the windows of the apartment. Alex was sitting on the bed with her head in her hands, her thoughts racing and giving her no rest. John hadn't come home at the usual time again. She knew what that meant. Another concert, another night out with friends, without her. Her heart was full of anger and frustration. She was searching for answers to questions she'd been asking herself for a long time. What had gone wrong? Where had they taken a wrong turn? More importantly, was there still a chance to fix things? The door creaked open softly and Alex jumped in surprise. There stood John, trying not to make a sound, like he thought he could avoid her anger. "You're running late," she said, not looking up. "Sandy, He started, but stopped when he realized his words wouldn't change anything. Alexandra slowly stood up and looked him in the eyes. She saw the man she once loved with everything she had. The man she was building a future with, a family with. But this man was a stranger to her now. "We need to talk," she said coldly, crossing her arms. John nodded, knowing this conversation wouldn't be easy. He took a seat, avoiding her eyes. "I can't keep doing this, John," she continued. "We live like strangers. You're always on tour, and I'm left here with the kids. I don't know what's more important anymore, our family or your music." John sighed, feeling the truth of her words. He knew she was right. He'd long since realized music had taken priority, but he couldn't admit it to himself. "Sandy, I know how you feel," he said gently, "but I just can't quit everything right now. We're so close to success. Just a little bit more and—" "Just a little bit more," Alexandra cut in, unable to hide the bitterness from her voice. "You've been saying that for years, John. How many times have I heard you say that everything will change and we'll be together again? But it never happens. It just keeps getting worse." John tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. There seemed to be a chasm between them, and he didn't know how to cross it. "Do you want me to quit music?" he finally managed to ask, sounding confused. Alexandra was quiet. She just stared at him, waiting to see what he would say next. "I can't," he admitted. "Music is my life, but you're my life too. I want to figure out how to make it work. I really do." She sighed again, feeling the strength leaving her. She couldn't fight the dilemma anymore, loving him but being disappointed in the person he'd become. "Maybe there's one last chance, John," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. "If we can't figure it out, I don't know how we can go on." He knew those words weren't just a threat. They were an ultimatum. Even though his heart hurt, he knew she was right. "All right," he agreed, standing up and going over to her. "I'll do anything to change things. I promise." But as their hands touched, the world shook again. The phone in his pocket rang. He saw Tom's name on the screen and knew he had to answer. "Sorry, I need to take this." He pulled away for a second. Alexandra just stared at him, not really believing what she was hearing. Her heart was pounding as she watched John start to speak. It was short, but from the sound of his voice, she knew something big was going on. "I've got to go," he said, shoving his phone into his pocket. "It's important." Alexandra just stared back at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "What could be more important than talking to me?" she asked, her voice sharp as a knife. He paused, clearly realizing the weight of his words. "It's about the band," he finally said, and there was something uncertain in his voice. "They need me." Her eyes darkened with anger. This was the moment of truth, the moment that would determine their fate. "Then go," she said, her tone cold. "But don't expect me to be here when you get back." Those words felt like a final decision. John stood there, hesitating, unsure what to do. Instead of fighting for what they had, he turned and walked away. "Sorry, Sandy," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know what else to do." And he left, shutting the door behind him and leaving her in the empty room. Alex felt her heart shattering, but she knew this was the only way. Now she was free. For the first time in ages, she felt unchained from the man she'd once loved. A few weeks went by. Alex was back to her usual life: kids, work, house. She tried to forget about John, but he was like an open wound that still hurt. They hadn't talked since he left, and every time the phone rang, it was someone else: friends, family, colleagues. One night, after the kids were asleep, Alex heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, there he was, John. He looked exhausted, but something new was in his eyes, a determination she'd never seen before. "I'm back," he said quietly. Alexandra stood there, frozen, not sure what to say. She'd been waiting for this, but now it had happened. She wasn't so sure she wanted it. "So, what happened?" she finally asked, looking at his face. "I quit the band," he said, his voice firm. "I realized that I lost the most important thing in my life, you. And that's not okay with me anymore." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She wasn't expecting him to make such a drastic change, but there was something genuine in his eyes that had been missing for a while. "But why now, John? What made you realize this?" she asked, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "Because my life feels empty without you and our kids," he replied. "I thought music was all I needed, But that was wrong. You were right about us losing touch. But I want to fix that. If you let me. Alex was silent for a moment, thinking about his words. She wanted to trust him, but her fear of getting hurt again held her back. I don't know, John, she finally said, tears forming in her eyes. I don't know if I can trust you again. He stepped closer, touching her face gently. Just one more chance, Sand, he whispered. Let me prove I can be the guy you deserve. Her heart raced between the past and the present. She didn't know if she could trust him, if she'd feel the way she used to again. But in that moment, one thing was clear. John was willing to do anything to win her back. Okay, she said, her voice full of resolve. But it's really the last shot, John. If you blow it, there aren't any more chances. He nodded, knowing her words weren't empty threats. Everything depended on him now. They stood on the cusp of a new chapter, one that could be filled with happiness and challenges. But Alex was ready to take a chance. For herself, her kids, and that love that might not be completely gone.